life, your term show.
Okay, I am here and honored to be with the author of Fiat Food, Matthew Lysiak. So Matthew, you've wrote an incredible book. So why don't we get right into it? What is Fiat Food and what was your motivation behind writing this book?
Thanks for having me, Anthony. Fiat Food. What is Fiat Food? It's the substitution that took place accelerating and really beginning in 1971 from real food to cheaper alternatives to obfuscate monetary consequences of inflation. And, you know, you can compare the diet pre-1971 to the diet today, and you'll see that a lot of the nutrition that we had pre-1971 has just kind of been fiated out. And why I call it Fiat Food is because when we went off of the gold standard on August 15th, 1971, when Nixon implemented what's been known as the Nixon shock, there was a real concern. I pulled a bunch of FOIA requests and I found that there was this almost panic over what they knew would inevitably be the rising cost of food. So because they were going to be, printing all these dollars and putting them into circulation, so naturally the increase in dollars chasing the same amount of goods would have resulted in a bit of sticker shock. And politicians are pretty savvy in a sense that they know they can have endless war and we'll still vote for them. And we can have a mild amount of corruption and the American people still keep voting these people into office. But when food prices go too high, political instability usually follows. I mean, just you could look at Sri Lanka in 2022 and see what happened when the price of milk and eggs went up too high. So what happens is this kind of like cat and mouse game where the government's trying to confuse the public and alter the food supply. And I would argue that they've done it with remarkable success. If you look today at the normal diet of the American public, it's remarkably different than that from the American of 1971.
Yeah. And their health as well, like immeasurably different. We've all seen the pictures of a beach, in San Francisco in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and everybody is trim and fit, and guys have muscular definition and women have muscular definition and flat tummies, and everybody looks fit, and that's the norm. And if you looked at the population today, I believe over 80% of Americans are obese. And in Canada, maybe the numbers are slightly better, but still not by much.
Yeah, exactly. And what people should realize is that this wasn't an accident. This wasn't led by individual people making individual choices. This was a top-down priority, starting with the Nixon administration up until modern day. I would argue accelerating into modern day to just alter what we view as nutrition, essentially like a 55-year psyop. Because look, I have 4 daughters, Anthony. I could actually feed them ratably if I buy 5 boxes of cereal. Like that, it's actually really cheap. But the nutrients that we need to thrive have increasingly become cost prohibitive, and I would argue have become like a luxury of the upper classes almost now. And that's not like we've really done a great job of creating an appearance of abundance in the food supply, when in reality the nutrients are becoming increasingly rare.
Yeah, it's quality over quantity, and quality is what truly matters. Like we need a basic minimal amount of quantity to actually live off of, but it's the quality of those nutrients that we're consuming that really have an impact on our health. You could eat 10 boxes of cereals and not get the nutrition just from eating 1 steak. And so that's what truly matters, right?
I just had the biggest steak of my life right before I got out. I'm feeling really good. Yeah, no, exactly. And I feel fortunate that I can afford to buy a steak. But
you've got that post-steak glow about you, Matthew.
Oh man, I'm feeling it. Yeah, and it's been like the consequences of this, I would argue, are catastrophic based on, go to any Walmart in America and look in line and you'll see the degradation of the human body.
Mm-hmm. So what is, thanks for bringing that up. What is the scope of the impact that you think this Nixon shock has had on human civilization, on society, on the health of people in the world? Like, just how big of an impact do you think this has? Like, what is the scope of this, just to frame it for people?
Dude, it's like, it's literally impossible because it's so huge. And because what happened was, after World War II, we had Bretton Woods. And the Bretton Woods Agreement meant that the United States agreed to hold gold in reserve of $1. And that dollar would be the base currency for the whole world, practically the whole world. And when Nixon just upended that in 1971, at the time, there was a time when $35 you could redeem for 1 ounce of gold, and that amount shifted. But what happened was, you'll notice, I talk to people who grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and they'll talk about how, certain toys used to be made out of wood. Like what we find, I live in Patagonia, Arizona, so I'm 18 miles from the Mexican border. They put corn in our Coke here through fructose. You go across the border, it's sugar. They're constantly, and the reason is that the government is subsidizing all these very cheap alternatives. So these healthier, not that sugar is healthy, sorry, but these ingredients that we use for generations are increasingly being weeded out. And through subsidies and just trying to find cheaper alternatives, corporations are looking to get you to not eat meat, because meat you can't scale. You can't produce a cow at scale. It's talk to any butcher or farmer. I mean, it takes a lot of time. Same with somebody who makes like raw milk. It's time consuming. But you can make Doritos almost as quickly as you can make fiat dollars.
There's no energy tied to its production, similar to fiat dollars. So walk us through. So Nixon takes us off the gold standard. The US essentially defaults on their debts. They don't have enough gold to repay their debts to other countries. So instead of coming out and outright defaulting, they pull a hood and wink on everybody, and they essentially end the redeemability of dollars for gold. Okay.
So Nixon's not a good guy in my story, but to his defense, when he came into office, we were already in a bit of a pickle, because what he understood was we had issued far more promissory notes than gold we had in our reserves. So we were already perpetuating a Bernie Madoff-like scam. We had all these dollars out, but we didn't have the money. We didn't have the gold to back them. So
Yes.
He kind of was forced to do this. I mean, otherwise, all it would have taken were a few countries at the same time to try to redeem their gold at once to expose the American treasury as a complete fraud, which is what it was. But after this happens in the area of nutrition, you see the government, for the first time, really begin taking an active role in nutrition policy. So somehow, Anthony, for thousands of years, people just sort of knew what to eat, kind of like a lion, a dog. They know what to eat. They're not confused. They don't need books or podcasts to figure out what they should be eating. But in 1971, the government began taking an active role, and this was for a very important reason. They needed to shift the American food supply. So I'm going to try not to be long-winded here, but just to give your audience a bit of a setup, 1971 and in the early 1970s, there was also a parallel movement going on with this new environmental movement. And part of their premise was, and people my age will remember this, the big fear back then wasn't global warming. It was actually overpopulation. And that was the scare tactic that authorities were using to sort of wrestle control from different parts of the populace. And the theory went that we were producing people at such a fast rate on the earth that we are all going to starve to death because there wasn't going to be enough food. And meat specifically was so resource intensive that it would expedite the process of mass starvation. That was the theory. And there were books called A Diet for a Small Planet or Small Earth. I might be getting that slightly wrong. There's The Population Bomb was another book. These were all proven to be demonstrably false. But to people at the time, this ranked ahead of the Vietnam War on college campuses as the number one issue: overpopulation and worries that our food supply was just going to vanish. So Nixon appointed a guy named Earl Butz to be the head of the Department of Agriculture. And in 1971, Earl Butz was a fascinating character. He was fun to research. He would talk about, well, the housewife goes to buy a sofa maybe once every 10 years, but they go to the grocery store, sometimes a few times a week. So they notice the rising cost of food. And then the government began subsidizing for the first time guidelines on what people should eat. So this really began, there were some guidance in the 60s and the 40s, but nothing firm, or nothing that seemed kind of what it became in 1981, where they released a dietary food guidelines. And in this, it was kind of a monumental step, because it was the first time the government had a food policy on what people should eat. And it was pretty vague. It said, eat less meat, eat more grains. If you're hungry, eat jelly beans and gumdrops, was like a healthy between the meal snack, like very solid advice like this.
Yeah. Smoke for your lungs.
Yeah. I would point to right on. I would point to, though, the early 90s, I think it was 1992, food pyramid that came out, because then for the first time, it told people exact portions. And kids of the 90s, like myself, remember you go into a pizza shop and you see it, like an advertisement. Yeah. And this told us to eat, Anthony, they told us to eat 8 to 11 helpings of grains a day, which is literally the recipe for metabolic. Yeah, that's the base.
That's the base. Yeah.
And then saturated fat found in meat was up high.
Yeah.
And that was like to be eaten sparingly along with sugar. So it's just a recipe for metabolic destruction, and it's only increased since then. But there's been different metrics that the government sort of tries to use. One of them now is they've tied global warming to meat consumption pretty successfully. I think a lot of young people believe that eating meat changes the temperature of the earth. So they should eat grains like a 14th century peasant. Yeah. And this is really also, there's two other factors at play, and I'm sorry if I'm rambling, but one of them is for corporations, they've always loved this idea because, like, again, you could produce cereal like just on scale. Like you can mass produce that with very little opportunity cost, and Doritos and these mass processed plant grains. You could just make tons of them and make it appear that there's abundance of food. And because of that, they can charge a higher overhead. So the profit margin a corporation makes on cereal is significantly higher in most cases than a farmer makes off of meat, because it's so labor intensive. You can't jigger it too much. So they were really happy to latch on. And there's one of my favorite parts of my book was researching the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And people think I'm picking on this religion. I don't have an axe to grind with them, but the truth is they have become a huge part of the American dietary guidance. And this began in the early 1900s when the founder, Ellen G. White, was a young girl, got hit in the head with a rock. She said she woke up, she went into a coma and woke up, and God was talking to her, and God said, Ellen, Jesus is coming back soon. You need to make people's bodies and minds pure. And the way you do that is to remove their sex drive. And the cause of sex drive is meat, particularly red meat. So this church was really largely founded on this belief that you should be eating grains and not meat, because meat caused masturbation, which at the time, I know this is, your audience is going to think this is whacked out, but at the time, this is like a really mainstream belief that masturbation or carnal desires cause almost every sickness, from cancers to insanity, you name it. And they believed it was caused by an increase in sex drive. So she hired a young man named John Harvey Kellogg. John Harvey was tasked with finding a cereal to replace meat at the breakfast table. And at the time, early 1900s, people who could afford it ate meat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I mean, this is what people ate. They ate meat, and then if they could afford it. John Harvey came up with Kellogg's Corn Flakes as a way to replace meat for breakfast. essentially as an anti-masturbatorial drug for the masses. I know this sounds unbelievable, but his own writings and Ellen's writings, this is all really, they didn't hide this. John Harvey Kellogg was like a celebrity doctor of the time. So he went around giving speeches, his writings, a lot of writings. He was a real masochist, a sick guy. But after John Harvey left, somebody named Leanna Cooper followed him in the church. And she started the American Dietetic Association, which became the government arm of nutrition in the early 1900s. Now, 1971 comes, you have corporations looking to replace meat because they can make a higher profit margin on mass-produced grains. And you have the church who's making inroads, but still people are eating meat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. What changes in 1971 when Nixon decouples from gold is he's able to weaponize essentially the entire productive labor of the American public, and since Bretton Woods, the whole world, through the production of dollars, fiat dollars, to manipulate the food supply, to shift it from the one that we've had for thousands of years to kind of psyop us into believing this is sort of how we've always eaten. Lots of grains and cereals and skim milk, and that's healthy for us. It's not. It's all built on a lie, and it was done, I believe, with intent. Not that they tried to make us sick, but just the need to stay in power and to make the food supply appear abundant. I know that was a lot.
Yeah, so you're properly framing it. And for anyone who doesn't know your background, you're not a nutritionist, you're an investigative journalist. And so you approach this thing like a crime scene in that you're looking at the incentives and following the money here, correct?
Yeah, just a disclaimer. I'm not only not an economist, I'm not a nutrition, I'm not an economist. Like, I am an investigative crime reporter. So I spent over a decade at the New York Daily News, which when I was there was the 5th biggest paper in the country. I specialized in trying to find the motive of mass shooters. I was all around the country during that period, and I got really good at figuring out motive and diving into documents.
I like you clearly pick lighthearted topics to cover, eh?
Yeah, my wife reminds me of this all the time.
Bit of a dark bent, but that's okay. We need people like you, Matthew. We need people looking into the darkness. So 1971, they take it off. They get Earl Butz in place with nutritional guidelines. Okay, you framed it as the seventh day has some influence here all along. And now, why does the government begin subsidizing big agriculture, corn, soy, wheat, sugar? Why do they begin subsidizing these, and how does that kick off a lot of this?
So through subsidizing it, and granted, your audience seems, from what I've seen, seems pretty well educated, so they probably understand that, like, the government doesn't actually borrow money. That's what we are taught as kids. So the government's taxing us, and they're using those tax dollars. No, that's actually not true. Every time the government spends, is printing new dollars. So it's devaluing everybody else's currency. So what they decided to do was now they're unrestrained, because pre-1971, there was a fear that, they could print too many people come back at once to try to redeem their dollars for gold. They wouldn't have the gold. They'd be exposed as a fraud. 1972, there's no fear. They could just print and steal everybody's wealth covertly to weaponize whatever war they want, or in this case, whatever market they want in food. So by having Earl Butz direct these government subsidies, these endless fiat dollars into corn, soy, and sugar, he was able to manipulate the food supply in such a way where it just appears like there's lots of food, but the nutrients aren't there. So if you go to a grocery store, I challenge your audience to go into the middle rows and find something without corn, soy, or sugar. Like, good luck. Like, it's not there. Everything, the incentives moved, so everything is guided by corn, soy, sugar, soy lecithin, high fructose corn syrup. I mean, it's endless. And
you could add seed oils to that list as well now.
Oh yeah. I mean, that was another thing that was just mind blowing to me, was how I have a section in my book on how it's like there were riots over that. There were riots over margarine and Crisco. When Crisco came out, or margarine came out, it's called oil margarine in the early 1900s, like people didn't regard it as food. It was like a fraud, and merchants were secretly putting it in and saying it was butter to fool people so they could charge higher prices. It was a really big deal, and people were put in jail for it. But we've been kind of manipulated to think that these non-foods are foods. I like to think of Crisco. I think of Crisco a lot because it was really the first time Crisco, the ultimate, really the first, the OG of seed oils, I call it, is an interesting story because you had all this cottonseed waste after the Industrial Revolution that was used to lubricate oils, but the revolution ends, and now Procter and Gamble had all this cottonseed waste and all these machines to manufacture cottonseed waste and didn't know what to do with it. So they're literally like, we're just going to get people to eat it. And at first people are like, no, this is gross. This is absolutely disgusting. But they kept pushing it. And then what happens, you see, is when World War II hits, people are just so hard up financially that Crisco is a cheaper alternative. And they really demonized the shit out of lard. Like lard, which was used for thousands of years, you could see advertisements that are like, don't be one of those old-fashioned women with a smelly kitchen. Use Crisco. Because lard had an odor to it. But lard has, and suet and all these natural fats that we use for thousands of years to evolve have amazing health effects. While these other things, they're not food, they're toxic waste. But I think that, to me, was kind of a pivotal moment. Crisco's mainstream acceptance post-World War II, during World War II, was pivotal because it was the first time that corporations were able to manipulate us into accepting something into our food supply that's just like, frankly, it's not food. And furthermore, it's not a vegetable. Like, I don't know, like you have to really stretch things to consider a cottonseed a vegetable, but we call it a vegetable oil. And it's just, it's insane marketing. It's impressive.
Mm-hmm. And that goes for most seed oils, right? I mean, they're from the seed, squeezed seeds, as opposed to something like an olive oil or an avocado oil, which is a legitimate fruit from a tree that's being squeezed out.
Yeah, and you can find all these articles in the New York Times. Luckily, their archives still exist. You can still access them. And it's remarkable how they have all these really smart scientists being interviewed talking about the health benefits of Crisco. Now, they're funded by Procter & Gamble, of course.
Yeah.
And the American Heart Association jumps on board and begins talking about how wonderful Crisco is. Crisco literally causes heart problems. But because they sponsored heavily, Nina Teichel's got this. She broke this story through her research, which was Big Fat Surprise she wrote, which is an amazing book. They kind of owned it. They owned the American Heart Association to an extent. So it's all this incestuous shift of incentives that led us to this place where right now you have like pretty young girls sitting outside of New York City pulling their skin off of chicken and virtue signaling while they're eating like poor people. It's a weird dichotomy that shifted here.
Yeah. Okay. So big food starts getting subsidized. Farmers are rewarded for shifting from regenerative farming practices with an organic, holistic kind of farm where they're growing vegetables and the cows are eating the grass and the manure helps grow the grass and more vegetables. And it's all a symbiotic kind of process. Now they're being incentivized to grow monocrop culture, corn, soy, wheat, seed oil, canola, all of these different things. So farmers start changing things. Regulations start happening on small farms, right? And you have the food pyramid being pushed down from the top down that this is what you should be eating. You now have agencies being captured, like the American Heart Association, like you talked about, now pushing different incentives that have been captured by corporate interests. So all of these incentives start to happen, and the government doesn't want you to realize how bad inflation is because it's all behind the curtain. So you can see these incentives start piling up, and they haven't really stopped. Like it's only kind of gotten worse up until this point. So talk to me about all the diseases that have risen out of this and what kind of happened post 1971. What did we see in terms of the average American's health?
Well, your audience knows where this is going. It's plummeted. And that leads me to, like, especially in the case of diabetes and metabolic disease, astronomically high. I mean, you look at a picture of people waiting in line for the opening of Star Wars, and you can't find a fat kid. It's amazing. It's like hundreds of people long, and there's everybody looks like they're in reasonable shape. But that kind of ties into something else that I found really interesting, and that's a confluence of events I tried to outline successfully in my book that happened in January of 2023. January 2nd or 3rd, something known as the Tufts Food Compass was released. And this was the preeminent nutritionists of the day, all gathered to come up and tell us with a ranking of what we should eat. And they ranked Fruit Loops ahead of red meat, chocolate flavored soy milk ahead of whole milk, Cinnamon Toast Crunch cereal bars ahead of eggs. So, you find out it doesn't take a lot of digging. It's not hidden. I didn't have to be an investigative reporter to go on their website and see who their sponsors are. General Mills Foods, the producers of the cereals, they sponsored a large part of that study that saw a large amount of their cereals ranking, right? But this same week, I think January 9th or 10th, same month at least, 60 Minutes comes out with a segment, and they have a doctor on called Dr. Fatima Stanford, who I think is a real sociopath. And she gets on with her white coat. She's very eloquent, and they have a new breakthrough they want to share with the public. And they find out that obesity is no longer considered a lifestyle choice, that it's a, quote, genetic brain disease. And why I find this woman to be absolutely heinous and a disgusting human being is because what she's doing is she's undermining the individual's ability to have control over what is the most essential to being human, like control of your own body. Like she's saying, no, outsource your thoughts on health to her. Now, this segment, there was only one other expert brought on, and they were both paid hacks for Novo Nordisk, the parent company of Ozempic. The 60 Minutes episode was also sponsored by Ozempic. So this happens the same month that this Tufts Food Compass comes out telling us to eat Fruit Loops over meat and eggs. And that same month, later in the month, the American Pediatrics Association, for the first time in 15 years, says that we should be prescribing these weight loss drugs like Ozempic to kids as young as 12.
Hey everyone, before we dive back into the podcast, I've got a quick shout out about the Your Life, Your Terms report. This is Tom's weekly newsletter where he and Nick share real stories, experiences, and powerful insights to help you live life on your terms. Each week, Tom breaks down the economy, real estate, macro trends, and Bitcoin, and gives you actionable steps to make these insights work for you. No fluff, no vague predictions, just a clear path to thriving no matter what's going on in the world. Tens of thousands of Canadians are already getting the real information they need to level up their lives every week. I can honestly say it's the only newsletter that I've stayed subscribed to for years. It delivers real value that keeps me coming back for more. Join us and start getting the insights and tools to create the life you want, plus entertaining and inspiring stories from Tom and Nick along the way. Sign up for free at rockstarinnercircle.com/get-started and start living life on your terms. That's rockstarinnercircle.com/get-started. Your first step to living life on your terms.
It's like, I dug and I couldn't find this smoking room where there's a conspiracy and they all gathered, but I'd sort of be naive to think that this wasn't a rollout, what's known in the Mexicans rollout. And I guess my point in telling that story is that there's a lot of incentives to have us sick and fat and unwell. And I think there's another component where Dr. Fatima Stanford comes in, where there's a broader issue about trying to have the individual give up their self-autonomy, outsource their decision-making to an authority. And I mean, I think there's something sinister there. And I think what we see now in America is there's a division happening. And unlike what the media portrays, I don't think it's like a left-right thing. I think it's more like people choosing to really step outside of credentialed authority dogma and independently evaluate for themselves, like what they think they should do versus the other side. And I write a lot about for other publications, I write a lot about the raw milk movement. And I find that epitomizes it precisely because it's like a lot of libertarian weirdos like myself and hippie granola moms from the left all fighting to have the dietary choice of raw milk, which is, has a lot of health benefits. So it's like it just jumps into a lot of different fields that are outside of diet, but diet, I think, is the tip of the spear because that's how we live.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So based on what you've said so far, what we've covered, I could easily just tie it back to evil corporations, greedy capitalists that have all these perverse incentives to push their engineered process food products. And, big pharma becomes involved at a certain point because they profit from a sick, unhealthy population because that's a profitable lifelong patient if they're going to be giving them drugs like Ozempic. Okay. But can't we just tie that to corrupt corporations and people running these corporations as opposed to money itself or the government?
I'm glad you asked me this because this is actually something that's been fucking driving me out of my mind. Am I allowed to swear on here?
Well, it's too late now.
Oh, yeah. So, with the MAHA movement, we have an opportunity right now. And I've been in touch with some of Kennedy's people. They're all good people. They're all well-intentioned. And I think Kennedy's done amazing work in this field. But the Meanses, Kaylee and Casey Means doing their little publicity tours. Everything they're saying is true about metabolic destruction. But the core of their argument is that it's from corporate greed, that is when we can really get to the heart of corporate greed. My issue with this is it's just the facts tell a different story. And these same corporations were incentivized to feed us mass-produced shit pre-1971. They didn't just become greedy in 1971. They were trying as hard as they could. They were making small inroads with something like Crisco or margarine, these little inroads. But for the most part, come 1970, the American public is eating on average 155 pounds of meat a year. That's a lot. And what happens in 1971 isn't that suddenly corporations got evil. It was that the incentive structure shifted. The American government shifted the incentives to give us the appearance of abundance for political gain and to keep control of power. But it's just a psyop, and the corporations are simply following the incentives. Look, I don't think they're the good people in this at all. But if they have a fiduciary, am I saying that right? Fiduciary duty to their shareholders, by law, not to the public. So if they have the opportunity to jump on the Department of Agriculture board or sponsor a tough study to come up with a food compass, they have a duty, they have a legal obligation to do that, or else they answer to their shareholders. Mm. It's the system that broke when we went fiat. It wasn't that corporations just spontaneously all became evil. So I appreciate what the Means are doing in their little tour thing, but if we're not focusing on the right enemy, the patient's laying on the table, we're diagnosing all these symptoms, but the core of what put that patient down there, which is destruction of our monetary system, until that's addressed, we're all just throwing snowballs on Ferris wheels trying to connect, and it's impossible.
Well, I could see the incentive definitely on an individual level to eat this crap because you have no other choice. If you have a certain income level that just doesn't allow you to eat healthy, organic, whole foods, good quality meats, vegetables, fruits, I can totally see like you just don't really have a choice. You need to survive. You need to eat food. So I can see how inflation on an individual level has destroyed the ability for so many people, especially in food deserts in really poor areas of the country, especially in America, where you don't even have a choice on eating healthy food because it's not there or because you don't have the money to afford it, even if it was. But then even if you do have the economic means to do so, you do have to fight through so much propaganda and so much social conditioning that this food is normal to eat, right? Like you on every corner in Canada, you can find a Tim Hortons and now a McDonald's too, and other fast food, right? But you can't find good quality food options unless you buy the food yourself, cook it yourself. So I can see these incentives on an individual level. I guess what was tough for me when I first started learning about Bitcoin and fiat and these incentives was tying it back to the money itself. And I can easily see how somebody could say, well, it's just greedy corporations, right? It's not the money itself. But I think the ability to print the money and fund different things causes the distortions that allow these things to happen in the first place. Whereas if the state did not have control over the money, the citizens have much more of a say of what they want their taxes to do and where they want them to go, as opposed to just kind of having the money spent for them without even being taxed for that money, because it's a hidden tax. Most people don't truly understand inflation yet, and that money's being spent on their behalf without them even knowing it. And the result of that is higher prices of assets, food, that type of stuff. But I guess that was the tough part for me. And I could hear somebody listening to this right now and being like, well, it's just, really evil people, corporations, and government agencies that are being captured by those corporations.
I get it. I thought the same thing. This is what I thought before I dove into this. But it's not a coincidence that the United States government got invested in what we should eat in 1971. That was like when they began really tinkering with the food supply. It was, of course. And the money being broken is the whole cause of this, because this has been a 55-year attempt to hide, to mask the true consequences of monetary inflation. And I think I outlined this pretty effectively in my book, and I have over 200 citations. I meticulously chronicled this because I understand how the argument sounds. But why fixing the money would change that? Like if we went to, I used to be a gold guy, but gold always ends up getting centralized and taken by the government in time. I've moved to Bitcoin, but you can't, if you have a hard currency, if we shifted from fiat back to a hard currency, Bitcoin in and of itself doesn't do anything for food. It doesn't fix food. Of course it doesn't fix food. What it does do is it kills the Federal Reserve's ability to distort. And if we went back to a hard currency, one that cannot be inflated by government dictate, then there's no need to manipulate the food system to hide the consequences of monetary inflation that doesn't exist. Because the ribeye and eggs are not going to be cost prohibitive anymore. They're all going to come down. Then nature gets to sort of reassert itself. And I know it sounds like there's too many. It really isn't a lot of steps there. It really is just end the distortion campaign created by fiat. And it's, you talk about the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Over a 3-year period, they got over $200 million in subsidies to a university called Global India University. Now, Global India University, go on their website. They are the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Each one of their members, people who run it, are all church members. That money was given to them. Almost every study that your audience is going to read about health and nutrition and meat comes from Global India. And they're observational studies which can't establish causal relation, only association. And everyone comes up with the same conclusion: meat causes X problem. So it's not science. It's like, it's religion, which is okay, just not with my tax dollars. That's like one way it's all used. It's like it's this propaganda campaign. It's all in sync. It's all aligned towards one goal, to like alter our food supply so we think that food is cheap, but it isn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think, so all these incentives point to the cheap food, and it's way beyond just food, right? It's families having less kids. It's people, children living with their parents much longer, not being able to afford to move out. It's the housing crisis. We see it all across society. And if you go to WTF happened in 1971.com, you'll see just dozens upon dozens of charts pointing to different inflection points happening across all areas of society since 1971, when Nixon broke that peg to a hard money, tying money to reality itself. So it's not just the food, it's kind of everything. But you follow enough of those threads for long enough, and you can't help but start to think this has something to do with the money. The money itself is rotting the incentives. Like, the societal rot that people feel today can be traced back to this. If you just pull on enough of these threads, it kind of leads to this one inflection point in history of 1971. Like, it's tough to ignore after a while.
It's impossible to ignore. And Seyfedina Moose, who really brought this idea to my attention, and he's like a mentor to me. I think he's a genius with economics. If people haven't read the Bitcoin Standard or the Fiat Standard, I encourage them to. He explained to me how, oh man, my daughter always asking for money. Guaranteed that's what that call was. He explained to me something that really was a revelation, which was that the currency is 50% of every transaction.
Yes.
So I mean, when you really understand that, you can't unsee it. And you understand then that you actually don't own the $10 bill in your pocket, because somebody else can print as much of those as they want. You don't own it. But I've kind of opted out. And since 2019, I've been transitioning into Bitcoin, which they can't produce more of. And because I've opted out of the fiat system, I've seen the cost of cars go down in terms of Bitcoin, the cost of housing go down in terms of Bitcoin. And my stakes have actually gotten very affordable in terms of Bitcoin, because there isn't some third party who can print as many Bitcoins as they want. There's 21 million fixed. Meanwhile, the fiat currency, which is, I think it's bordering on hyperinflation, just nobody wants to say it. But if you talk to somebody, and the people who are hurt most by this are the people who have the least money. It's a regressive tax, because especially in terms of health, I have friends who go to the dollar store to get dinner. The boxed processed grain foods, and they know they don't want to eat it, but it's hard. Mm-hmm. But it is the currency. And until that's addressed, that's why I get so frustrated when I see the memes or some of these other do-gooders trying to what we're going to just rail on corporations more. Yeah, I get it. They're bad. They're after money. All right. Not the problem. I mean, that's not the problem. We could tax the shit or pass new regulations. Nothing's going to shift. All the incentives are going towards one direction. Mm-hmm. And that's because of fiat. And until that is you can't tinker it. It needs to be destroyed, in my opinion. I know there's some people who think that we should, it's a cancer. And I think what you do with the cancer is you remove it. Mm-hmm. And then nature will sort of reassert itself. And then people won't need to buy my book or to listen to podcasts on health. They'll remember what to eat again.
Yeah. Yeah. If you remove all the manipulation. Even when you go down this rabbit hole, it's pretty easy to kind of figure out what to eat relatively quickly. You realize organic whole foods is the solution to every metabolic disease and dysfunction. And so that's not the hard part. The hard part is being able to afford those foods. And that's the crux of it. For years in my early 20s, I knew I had understood, how to eat a healthy whole foods diet. The problem was, if I go to the grocery store or if I go to a restaurant, I can't afford to buy the steak. I have to get the chicken or the cheaper sandwich because I just simply can't afford the steak. So that was the problem. And it's I know today that if I go to the meat department, I'd be better off buying grass-fed beef, grass-fed, grass-finished beef, because it's healthier. The animal's been raised healthier without the GMOs, corn feed, without the antibiotics, without all the human finagling. It's just been raised in its natural environment, eating its natural diet, and it's much higher in omega-3s versus omega-6s, and the fats are better. Like, that's kind of easy to figure out. The hard part, Matthew, is affording that stuff for the average person. Like, it's not that hard to figure it out, but it's actually going and buying it. And that is the fundamental issue, because if not, I would be able to order steak at every restaurant if it was more affordable. I'd be able to get all grass-fed, grass-finished, all organic vegetables that have a higher nutrient density than the, mass-produced vegetables that have continuously lost nutrients and vitamins over the last 50 years. So it's the money itself is the difficult part. It's not figuring out the nutritional side. That comes relatively easily, right? So that's how I kind of break it down to myself. Like, okay, it's the money itself is the problem. The money's becoming worth less and less over time. It's buying me less quality food. And it's not a choice of mine to buy that less quality food. It's just a reality that I struggle with, right? And that's the common problem, I think, for the average person.
Totally legitimate. I hear you. I would counter that going the way of fiat food is in the long term more expensive. And one of the reasons is, so if I eat a steak in the morning, I am not hungry for a good part of my day. I might have a snack a little later, and that's it. Because a lot of times hunger comes from a lack of nutrients. So I could eat mass produced crap all morning and continuously being hungry. It's like chimpanzees in the jungle, right? They are eating leaves, but they have to eat, they're largely vegetarian, so they have to eat they eat all day. All day they spend eating because they're not getting enough nutrients to support their weight. And that's sort of like modern fiat man. They're eating all day, which is a little more expensive, but I think the real health the real costs come in when you have to step into the medical world. And if you can go animal products, natural animal products, the healthier, better. I'm not as much of a stickler, and I don't, this isn't my wheelhouse of expertise on like organic and non-organic and grass-fed. I truthfully just don't know.
Sure.
But yeah, we have In-N-Out Burger here, and they have something called the Flying Dutchman, which is just like patties of meat. So good. I don't know the quality of the meat. I feel great after I eat them. I can eat 7 of them, and my wife's always amazed at how much I could eat, and it's amazing. And then the one issue I had with my diet though is I play a lot of basketball with people much younger and bigger than me, and I was getting tossed around. My weight went down too much with like a carnivore diet, so I incorporated raw milk, and that keeps my weight up, and it's also delicious. It's absolutely delicious. But again, you're right. It's expensive. So I pay $8 for half gallon. It's all pricey. I just think that like there's certain things in my life I've given up. I mean, I'm a writer, so I'm not like super wealthy guy. There's just certain things I've given up and that my family's given up so that we can eat this way. Yeah, I mean, it's been hard. There's times where I have to go to Walmart I usually go to a farmer's market. I know a farmer where I get my special grass-fed, non-vaccinated cows. There's periods where nobody's buying my writing, and I go to Walmart to get my steak. And I know it's not as good for me, but
it is what it is. Yeah, you do the best you can. That is a good point, I guess. Yeah, because if I'm just looking at sticker shock, comparing stickers at the grocery store, that's neglecting all the other costs of those foods down the line, such as medical costs. You're right. If you're not getting as many nutrients, you might be hungrier later. So that is a very fair point, actually. Something I hadn't considered. I guess maybe because we have
the one thing I want to say more than anything is like when I'm on deadline, when I have a book due in 3 days, I am pure carnivore because I'm streamlined mentally. I'm so much more productive. So the way I justify my expensive steaks to my wife is like, look, it's worth it because I think better and I'm going to work better. I'm going to make more money. And one of the things I think about a lot is like the amount of gifts we're missing, because these dietary guidelines that we spoke about earlier, they're not just dietary esoteric rules from the government. They become implemented in every hospital, prison, and most pivotally public school in the country. So you have kids going to public school, and by the time they come out, they're totally metabolically compromised. So like would Henry Ford have ever come up with a Model T if he was on like a public school diet of like Fruit Loops, right? Like, of course not. No. But how many gifts today are we missing societally from people just who have foggy minds and flabby bodies, who can't think right? So that's the biggest cost to me, is I can't eat that way unless I'm prepared to not work.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I can't do it.
So I've seen this actually with my cats, Matthew, because when I first adopted these cats, I knew nothing about pets. I didn't have them my entire life. And when we adopted these two cats, I was very busy at the time. And so the person we adopted them from said, this is the kibble that they eat. And these are little cans of Fancy Feast that they eat. And I went for about 6 months because I was just busy in my life, where I'm like, I know this isn't the best food. I just don't have the time to figure out cat diets right now. And so I just kind of pushed that to the bottom of the to-do list until one of my cats started bleeding from her little butt every single day after she used the bathroom. And I'm like, well, this is a problem. So we took the cats to the vet. And at this point, I started doing my own research. And the vet, tells me we need to put them on this special diet, blah, blah, blah. And I look at the kibble, and it's from, like a Dr. Hill's or something, kibble brand. And I look at the kibble ingredients. They're the exact same as the kibble that we're already giving our cat. And it's stuff like corn filler. And yeah, it's corn and like wheat filler and like rice filler. And I'm like, I don't know too much about animals or cats, but some basic research tells me that cats are obligate carnivores, meaning they eat meat, and that's all they eat, and they must eat meat. And I'm thinking about it. I'm like, this is like buying processed crap from the middle of the grocery store for humans. This isn't any different. This is just processed, shelf-stable grains covered in some sort of meat juice or something, some meat byproduct that allows them to actually eat this crap, but it's grains. And I start doing a deep dive because now I'm paying attention. My cat's butt's bleeding. I want to stop this issue. And I look into raw food pet diets. And I'm like, well, this makes complete sense. I'd already figured out human nutrition for myself. I'm like, holy crap, this is the same thing, but it's happening to pets. Then you do a deeper dive and you're horrified to see that much of the pet nutrition, which is very, very, very little that's taught in veterinary schools, is funded by the kibble companies. And you're like, this is just the exact same thing, but in pet food. And you realize there's this matrix surrounded by with pet nutrition, with actual veterinarians prescribing these unnatural processed food diets. And then they tell you at the appointment, hey, you shouldn't feed raw. There's food handling, mispractices. They can get salmonella and stuff. And I'm just racking my brain, like, how did the cats survive for hundreds of thousands and millennia of years by not eating the Dr. Hill's kibble and by just hunting mice and rats and little bunnies for their diet before we ever domesticated them? So I'm just racking my brain on this. And you have to kind of push back against the vet, like, hey, we're going to try this raw food diet, and they're warning us it's not certified by some governing body. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I totally understand. I'm going to try it. Matthew, within 1 day of putting them on a raw food diet and just giving them meat that's kind of mixed with organs and some bones in the meat, from a raw food pet store, the bleeding stopped. They were puking every 2 weeks, like once every 2 weeks, just randomly they would puke in my apartment. The puking stopped. The bloody butt stopped. Every single health issue that they were facing stopped literally overnight. And they've been thriving ever since we put them on this diet. But it took me researching and realizing, oh my God, all these same perverse incentives are set up in the pet food industry. So these companies can just push this garbage onto pets. Then you're like, you see all these sick animals, all these dogs and cats that have diabetes. And you're like, how does a cat weigh 30 pounds when its healthy body weight should be 9 pounds and it has diabetes? And you realize it's the exact same thing, just in the pet food industry. And there's so much propaganda tricking the average person who's maybe not thinking critically about this, that they need to eat this food. And if there's an issue, you put them on the special kibble, but the special kibble has the exact same ingredients. And then you realize, oh my God, it's another medical industrial complex where they want to vaccinate the cats, where they want to shoot the cats with insulin because now the cats have diabetes and you have to give it its daily insulin shot. And you're like, this is ridiculous. There's not a single wild animal out there in the entire planet that has diabetes. It's actually like sickening when you really kind of learn about it, because you see all these sick animals that are just being that are helpless, that are being fed this crap by their owners.
Everything you just said could apply to 95% of the American public. That was the most interesting thing I've heard all week, by the way. That's fascinating. To stay on the topic of cats, I have like a little writing cabin that I'm in now, so my kids don't harass me, even though they keep calling me. I could just shut my phone off. But I used to have a stray cat come, and named Misifus. And it would always come with little animals, and it would drop off. There was a hunt. Cats are killers. They're hunting machines.
Yes.
And he would like come and he'd bring little mice. He'd chew up a rabbit and throw the corpse on my door out of respect. And I put some water out. And my wife's like, he's probably really hungry. Why don't you just give him a little grains? Not a lot. And I was kind of hesitant, but I'm like, I like the cat. And I did. In short time, the cat shifted its job from hunting animals to meowing at the door for grains. That was its new form of hunting. And then it became fat, and then it disappeared. So like, I blame my wife. I'm like, you killed my cat. You killed Misifus, because Misifus was a hunter in sheep, svelte, like breeding dead animals. And hunting became sitting at the door meowing for grains.
Yeah, it's sad. And you realize that these foods are engineered to be addictive the same way that all of these food scientists and engineers are engineering our food to be addictive. The exact crunch of the Dorito chip that they've engineered in a lab and tested against 20 different A/B split tests to see which crunch is more satisfying. Like, you realize you're facing industrial weaponization from some of the smartest scientists in the world that are addicting you to this bullshit food. And you're like, holy crap, they're doing it to the animals too.
And they're telling us, these idiots who we trusted for decades have convinced the vast majority of people that saturated fat found in meat is the cause of all heart problems. And it's been debunked 1,000 times. It's not true. Reality dictates it is. None of it's true. And I'll go out with somebody, and if I'm eating a steak, this has literally happened. I could be drinking a 2-liter of Mountain Dew Code Red, and nobody would say a word to me. But if I'm eating a steak, people be like, oh, are you worried about your cholesterol? Like, is everything okay? Meanwhile, like, I run 4 miles every day. I'm not in the greatest shape on earth, but it's usually really overweight people giving me health advice. And you can't say the obvious thing. You're like, you're stuck. You can't be like, dude, you're fat. Like, stop. Yes. You have to take it. To be like, I don't know. I hope it's all right. Because you don't want to get into a health conversation. People think you're insane if you think that eating the food we've eaten for thousands of years is healthy. And we should be kind of like stuck in this box of, over the last 60 years where we've altered the food supply. And we should always be speaking from, because we've just sort of figured out that, obesity is a genetic brain disease. We have no control. So we just throw our hands up and just listen to the experts. They've led us so well.
Yeah, that might be the toughest part of all is being a contrarian in this world and thinking for yourself and abandoning the advice of the so-called experts. Like I said, I'm no pet nutritionist. I'm no veterinarian. I'll be the first to admit that. But it didn't take me long of doing my own research and just having some courage and really kind of, thinking this thing through to the sand to decide, okay, this is the right decision to make for my little cat. And the cat's really benefited from that. So I'm glad. And I go to those vet appointments still for a little yearly checkup. And they always warn me against the raw food. And I smile, I nod, I say, yep, you're totally right. And then I do my own thing anyways. And I think that's just what you have to do in this crazy world that we're in today.
My doctor, I have to go to a checkup. Well, I'm in remission for cancer. I had cancer when I was a teenager and ate a horrible diet. So every now and then my wife convinces me to go to an allopathic doctor. And they're always really overweight. It's in particular, it's like one very overweight man. And he wheezes. When he talks, he's wheezing, and he's telling me I'm eating too much meat, and I need to eat. Like, I'm always like, Bridget, I'm never going back to this. My wife's name's Bridget. I'm never going back to this. This is just ridiculous. He can't move. Mm-hmm. But that's the world we live in, and you can't. Like, once I think COVID was obviously awful, but one of the big benefits was, especially for me, was it changed me because. Oh, wow. There are a lot of lies going on, like a lot of lies. And it sort of jumped the shark, to use a phrase from the 70s, in my belief that these people lied a lot, because I've been in journalism a long time. powerful people lie, but they usually do it in the best interest of like what they think is short term for their career. This was different. This was something way out there. And I think one of the blessings of COVID was that a lot of people looked at these credentialed authorities through a very different lens.
Yeah. I think they fucked up. I think they made it too obvious because it was a big awakening for a lot of people. So, Matthew, I know you got to get out of here. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your work. Where can people find your book and check you out as well if you want to share your personal stuff?
I'm horrible on social media. I'm on Twitter, but I just repost things. I'm not good at promotion. Safe House, Seyfedina Moose has a publishing house, and that's where you can find my book. It's on Amazon and bookstores. You could find it other places, but it's there. And I'll encourage though people they don't have to buy my book. If you do, that's great. But if you just go a month, like don't even listen to me, just go a month eating animal-based products, or if you have any grains, and try to stay away from grains. If you have fruits and vegetables, make sure they're organic. Just try that for a month and just see what your body tells you. A month. The first few days, you're going to feel hell. Try it for 1 month. And don't listen to me. Just, how do you feel? And I mean, I think you'll find that it's a life hack like none other, and you'll never go back.
Yeah. Trust your own instinct.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the big message, I think.
Right on.
Matthew, thank you so much, man. It's been a real pleasure. And I hope everybody checks out your book, Fiat Food. It's on Amazon. It's pretty easy to find. So yeah, thank you for your time, Matthew. Hope to connect again in the future.
Definitely. Thanks again. You too.